Hey guys, A push one. This is the video lecture on the French and Indian War. A very important topic of which you should have plenty of background knowledge of, especially after reading the book, the readings that you have and everything else. So remember that the French and Indian War in Europe is not known as the French and Indian War. It's actually known as the 7 Years' War. You'll see that on tests sometimes. Sometimes it'll actually list it or mention the 7 Years' War. They're not trying to trick you. It's just that the wars were actually known by different names in different areas. So the French and Indian War is actually in Europe known as the 7 Years' War, but they're exactly the same war. It's also known as the Great War for Empire. Kind of like the World War One becomes, the war to end all wars. This is actually the War of Empire, the epic of imperialism to its max. Also know that some historians actually argue too that the French and Indian War, or the 7 Years' War, whichever name you want to use, was also like almost a mini global war, a world war to some degree, because it actually did involve several different elements and expanded beyond just the North America region, the colonies. So it's an important one you should know. The key point here is was 1763 a turning point in the British colonial relationships? And this is a very important point that you should know, and that's like about the biggest hint I could possibly give you. Man, I would really be able to answer that question if I were you. But then you should be able to by the time we're done with this. Okay, North America by the 1750s. Remember that whole exploration, man, it just blew this thing completely wide open. And you have the British colonies located, and this is the French claims to territories. It's more British, and you have the Spanish that have all this region. You do have some Russian element was taking place, but that doesn't really become a major concern or even a major player until quite later in U.S. history. But you should have an idea of the regions of which the claims were laid. Okay, so if you can pretty well explain that, okay, you'll be in good shape. Okay, in 1754, the first clash between the British and first major clash between the French and the English began. Remember that the British colonies have began to be pushed further, and they begin to population. I'm really trying to go too fast. Population begins to increase and it gets pushed further west. They're being infringed into the Native American territories, which had already been Native Americans that were being pushed further west. But you also have the major French element. And this all becomes a major, it just needs that one spark to set it off. And this is the Ohio Valley's region in which is going to set it off. The British began to feel that the French were imposing really too close to their colonies and to their claims of the land. So the spark that kicks this off, in large part, is that the British send a little guy, almost known, he's a surveyor, and I'll talk a little bit about George Washington a little bit later on. But he sends him George Washington over to Fort Necessity. And basically what George Washington's been given instructions to do is to go to the French that are at Fort Duquesne. Yeah, that's how you pronounce this, guys. It's Duquesne. I know it doesn't look that way. He's to go to Fort Duquesne, and he's actually to tell the French, basically, to put it nicely, get the out. Okay, just get out. You're too close. This is our territory. You're infringing on our territory. And remember, there's not a big love between the French and the English anyway to begin with. So, but that basically what starts it off. The Delaware and the Shawnee Indians, remember the French have an excellent relationship with most of the Native Americans, not all of them, but for the most part they have a wonderful relationship with the Native Americans. And this will become problematic. That's why, of course, it's known as the French and Indian War. It's not that the French were fighting the Indians, but that the Indians were allies with the French. Okay, key point. Okay, Samuel de Champlain, okay, he sides with the Hurons against the Iroquois, and Samuel de Champlain, as you can probably guess, he's French, had settled the areas in Quebec and Canada, and he actually ends up taking sides with the Native Americans, so or pitting one against the other. And this is a thing that takes place a good portion of American history, not only with the British, with the French as well. they had no problem pitting the two Native American tribes against the other cultures, tribes against each other. And you just let your enemies destroy each other, and you don't have to do it yourself. But he sides with the Hurons against the Iroquois, and Iroquois don't forget this. They become pretty brutal. I kind of always have a. It's funny when you. It's not funny. Let me rephrase that. It's ironic that there's a lot of paintings or depictions of Native Americans scalping. You see, he's got the knife and holding it in his mouth, and he's already did the cut. He's beginning to scalp this guy. Actually, guys, just so you know that scalping was not an original Native American practice. Actually, that was learned from the English. Or actually, even not even the English, but most Europeans. It was a practice that the Europeans did. It was a bounty for scalps, and they would go out and do it. But the Native Americans actually perfected it. So just so you remember that, okay? So the Iroquois, don't forget that Samuel Champlain is actually one of the major enemies of the Iroquois. Sided with one of the major enemies of the Iroquois. Okay, you were given a document, the Albany Plan of Union. Hope you've read it and that you're able to, you need to read through that so you have an understanding of the Albany Plan of Union. So I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail of that in this lecture. But big key things here. Benjamin Franklin, okay, he gathers representatives from New England, New York, Maryland, and Pennsylvania for the key concept of a common or a unified unity for defense. Especially against Native American attacks and the threats of the French. Of course, the bottom line is that the Albany Congress actually fails. The petition doesn't work. Great Britain doesn't like the idea. As a matter of fact, in reality, if Great Britain had actually accepted it, hey, who knows? We may actually still be British. I mean, I don't know. But the Iroquois actually break off relationships with the English and actually begin to threaten to trade with the French. Because of the fact that they feel that they're being manipulated by the English, which they were. But they were also being manipulated by the French as well. Again, like I said, pitting the two against one another was actually made economic sense or war sense, whatever how you want to phrase it. But the fact is that the Iroquois break off the relationships. Now, as I said, you have this this document, and there's a couple of things I want you to pay attention to from that document. Is looking at why did the Albany Plan of Union actually fail to unify the colonies? Okay, you should be able to answer that question. What does the Albany Plan really say? I mean, look at the Albany Plan, read through it, and kind of summarize exactly. You should take a piece of paper and summarize out in your own words what you think the Albany Plan is trying to say. And was Benjamin Franklin actually being too optimistic, or was the plan actually a pretty good plan, and could it have possibly worked? And I think I posted a YouTube video from my good friend Mr. Hughes, and he kind of does answer that question to some degree. So you might want to look at the video if you haven't already. I'll take a look at that one. Okay, should be able to explain why the plan was defeated and what the significance of the join or die political cartoon that it was just on the previous slide. I'm just going to flip that back up here. This one right here. This is the join or die political cartoons. Sorry, I just lost my train of thought. Okay, so you should be able to answer each one of these. They're not really difficult to answer if you read over the Plan of Union. It's pretty straightforward. Okay, by 1755, Britain decides it's going to eliminate all French presence in North America. The Ohio Valley becomes a major sparking point, but it also becomes a major excuse. And you know what? We're tired of the French, and we want more land, and we want to expand, and to do that, we can't do that with the French there. So it basically actually does become that somewhat of an excuse to do that. And I like the phrase evict, okay? Basically, they've told them to get out. This is ours. We're expanding. We don't want you here, so you're being evicted. Well, technically, the British didn't even have the right to do this, but when you're talking about imperialism, you're not actually talking about who has the right and who doesn't have the right. It's talking about the strongest shall survive, I guess, to some degree. Anyway, General Braddock, okay, sends message to evict the French from the Ohio Valley, as we just mentioned. And not only that, but he also in Canada, Newfoundland, basically Newfoundland, New Scotia area. And he also was actually doing in the Louisiana territories, in Louisiana as well. He launches attacks against the Ohio Valley, the Mohawk Valley, and Acada. Now, ironically enough, General Braddock actually ends up being killed about 10 miles from Fort Duquesne. And he's actually surrounded, and he's actually way outnumbered by 1,500 French and Indian forces. And again, once bloodshed has been spilled, the eviction is no longer just an eviction. It actually is going to turn into, once bloodshed is done, it's going to turn into a war. I mean, this is going to end up happening. In the end, the British actually end up kicking France out of Louisiana. They are successful in kicking them out of Louisiana, but they're not effective, at least in the Ohio Valley, not originally. Okay, and that's where we end up with the Cajuns. The leftover French that are still there. The Cajuns are French from French ancestry, and this is just a depiction of Braddock after his death. See, the poor guys are all sad and everything. Okay, okay. Of course, as I said, this is going to launch a war, and 1756 war is formally declared. And as I said, the Native American tribes are exploited by both sides. The more of the Native Americans side with the French, and there's a reason for this, is because remember the French, they have a pretty good relationship with the Native Americans, and they're not really, at least the way the Indians perceive them, they're not looking to sort of permanent settlements. They're basically there hunting, fur trading, and so what they see is the English as being intrusive. They're actually chopping down forests. They're pushing them further and further west. They're claiming land as their own. Remember, land ownership is a concept that Native Americans do not understand or even believe in. But do realize that both the English and the British do exploit them. So it's not just the British, but both of them, both sides actually do. Okay, we're going to look at, this is a kind of a chart thing that you guys should be pretty familiar with or become familiar with. Between the British American and colonial tensions, because this is an important theme of the French and Indian War. Okay, methods of fighting. The colonists have been here long enough. They actually began to adapt the Indian style of guerrilla tactics. You've seen the movies before where the British line up. They line up in formation. They commit a bayonet charge. They're very disciplined. Where the colonists have actually, like I said, learned from the Native Americans, say, hey, this is not a very effective way of fighting. It's better to hide behind a tree or a rock or climb up in a tree or ambush from a building. So guerrilla warfare tactics are primary in the colonies. And this does not, this is kind of really a slap in the face of the British. They're like, wait a minute, these people are British and they're fighting like savages. They've lost all connection with their roots for some reason. Okay, the colonial militia, served under their own captains. They did not serve under British officers. And the British officers actually wanted to take control or take charge of the colonials. This became a major conflict between the two because, if you were say living in the New York region or New Jersey, we'll use New Jersey, you knew your people, you knew you knew the people that you were fighting with. You would probably be more likely to fight with someone you know. I mean, think about it. I don't know if how well you guys know our mayor, but most of you would be willing to fight with our mayor than if somebody came from say California or Spain, or let's get even further, just say Great Britain came in and said, hey, I want to take charge of your military. You wouldn't want it, and the colonials didn't want that either. Okay, basically the military discipline, there's pretty much no discipline. There's no major structure. I mean, like I said, they're more guerrilla warfare. They're more fly by the seat of your pants type of organization. Whereas the British, they drill. They have extremely tough discipline, and they are extremely disciplined army. Remember, they are the largest military force in the world at the time. One of the flaws that the colonials have is they resist to raising taxes to pay for anything. So it's basically private contributions. Who pays for this? I buy my own gun, I'll buy my own powder. My own knapsack, whatever. They don't like the concept of the raising of taxes and everything else. Where the British felt that the colonists should have to pay for their own defense. They felt like the colonists should ante up and pay for the soldiers. The British soldiers were coming over to help push the French out. Now, do understand that the colonials have asked, their mother country, Great Britain, help us get these French out of here. It's creating the problem. This is the whole reason that the British soldiers actually show up in force is because of this conflict between the colonials and the French. So, the colonists, the British actually look at it as, hey, you're a colony, and we're going to defend you, but you should also have to pay for for your own defense. But it is important to remember this concept, pay for their own defense, because the colonists looked at this as, hey, we're not paying for our own defense. We're a colony of Great Britain, therefore you are obligated to defend us. Interpretation, correct? Okay, the dealer, okay, casual, non-professional. They didn't dress. They kind of dressed in whatever clothes that they normally wear it every day. There was no basic uniforms. Where the British were, prima donnas. Okay, the British officers, they had servants. They had these nice tea settings that actually followed them around. So just imagine it. They would take their stop for their tea, and they had their servants with them and everything else. And then the colonists were anything but. Matter of fact, a letter was written to Townsend in England, basically stated, and this is a quote: "The colonial militia are in general the most dirtiest, most contemptible, cowardly dogs that you can conceive." Imagine, these are British. These are your brothers. These are your fellow quote unquote citizens. You're all British, right? But they were calling the colonists, and this comes out that they actually looked down at them, calling them cowardly dogs. Now these are the same people that you're fighting with, so you can about imagine that. Now by 1757, William Pitt actually becomes the foreign minister of Great Britain, and he kind of sides with the colonists to a large degree. He understands what their concerns are. He offers them a compromise that if the colonists remain loyal and provide military cooperation with the soldiers that are there, then the British would reimburse the colonial assemblies for the cost of the fighting. So he tries to be the peacemaker here. He tries to negotiate between the problems that the British officers and the regular army is having with these unruly dogs in North America. They're British brothers. Okay, but so like I said, William Pitt actually does try to create a calmness between the two, and Lord Loudon is actually removed. He's kind of really a harsh governor and commander that really doesn't like the British colonists at all. He thinks they've slipped they've went to the dark side. They've slipped into savagery, is the way he put it, the way he described them. They've become the barbarians of the New World. Okay, so William Pitt agrees to remove him, and the result actually is effective because the colonial morale increases by 1758, just 1 year after him doing this, and they actually began to cooperate more. They began to one of the issues that some of the British soldiers were having was that New Jerseyans wouldn't want to go fight in New York, or they wouldn't want to go fight in Virginia, they wouldn't want to go fight in Ohio. And I'll fight locally and protect my home and my farm, but I'm not going to fight for somebody else. But they, like I said, with William Pitt's effective negotiations with the regular colonists, they actually do begin to cooperate more, which actually was pretty good for the colonists in the long run. Okay, by 1758 to 1761, okay, the tide completely turns toward New England. Now, one of the key things you want to look to is, besides Spain actually becoming an ally with France in 1761, this is the entire disputed area of the British-French claim. So it's a large, massive area that's in dispute of who is in control of it. So this becomes extremely important. It's just so highly remember, this is where it kicks off, but this just becomes the whole disputed area, and in this region as well. French claims are still still claiming in the west of the Mississippi, and like I said, Spain has its own colonies in Spanish Florida, and what and they can't see on this map is would be like New Orleans, Texas, and all that, and Mexico as well. Okay, so but it's important also to know that Spain by 1761 becomes an ally with France, oddly enough. Okay, the Battle of Quebec actually is a major turning point in this war. It becomes one of the most significant of all the games in British and American history. Basically, and I'm not going to, your book kind of goes over the Battle of Quebec, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time here. But the main point is that the British actually crush the French. And this battle actually pretty well puts the nail in the coffin for the French, their last major stronghold. By destroying it, the French are pretty well lost. And it results in the Treaty of Paris. And guys, one of the things about the Treaty of Paris, let me make a real quick note here. You got to remember the Treaty of Paris, and you got to remember the dates because there are several of them. There's going to be a couple more that we're going to be studying or known as the Treaty of Paris. So you're going to have to remember the date. So when you're talking about the French and Indian War, you got to remember it's 1763 Treaty of Paris. Okay, because like I said, there's a couple more Treaty of Parises you're going to deal with. So you have to remember those dates. So 1763. 1763, the beginning of the Liberty Tree. Okay, that's how I remember it. 1763, the beginning of the Liberty Tree. Okay, we're not talking about the Revolution, so, but it's the beginning of the Liberty Tree, and now we'll get into that later on. Okay, the result of the Treaty of Paris basically is that France loses her Canadian possessions, and almost all its empire in India, and all the claims west of the Mississippi. Claims east of the Mississippi, not west. They lose all of their claims with east of the Mississippi. Now Spain gets all of French lands west of the Mississippi River. New Orleans, they grab New Orleans, but they do lose Florida to England. And this is ironic because Spain originally becomes an ally with France, but because of their aid with the English and helping the English, they benefit in the long run. Okay, England gets all the French lands in Canada. Okay, so why Canada is a British country now. They claim exclusive rights to the Canadian slave trade and all commercial dominance wow, I said England, in India. Okay, so you should know each one of those. These are the key points of which the Treaty of Paris, which you should be able to mention in an essay if you get to one, or be able to answer on a test. Okay, so know that. Okay, so North America in 1763 drastically changed, a drastic change. Look at this, the French end up with just a little, and that actually comes to play a little bit later on. We'll talk about that little event that happens later on. But almost doubles its size. Almost, if you count on the area. We'll talk about this line here in a minute. But it dramatically changes the map, and as you can see, the British are dominating into New Orleans. And ironically enough, in the Spanish territory, remember they got anything from the western Mississippi. The Spanish do gain big time from the Treaty of Paris, but their empire is still considered to be somewhat weak. Nowhere near as strong as what the British are at the time. And they hold on to this for a few more years, and then we'll end up taking that as well. We'll get that over. So key things, effects of the British War. First, it increases the colonial empire in the Americas dramatically. It greatly enlarges, of course, without debt, England's debt, which comes to play as well. Now, one of the things that even with William Pitt's negotiations and the morale picking up, the Britain's contempt for the colonists actually create extremely bitter feelings. They think they're a bunch of needy, whiny, backwoods. Like I said, they've switched over to the dark side to a large degree. Okay, therefore, England feels that there has to be a major reorganization of their American empire. This whole concept, and your book mentions this term, it's a term you should know, salutatory neglect. Salutatory neglect, know what that term means. Basically, the concept of salutary neglect is let them have it, let them run their own country. Everything's going fine. As long as everything's wonderful, we'll stay out. Well, it kind of becomes obvious that the salutary neglect was a big mistake. Letting the colonists kind of control their own destiny, govern themselves, having full say. You know, and I use an analogy, and I'll do that in class. I won't do it here because it would take me too long to go through the analogy right here. Okay, and hey, good old George. George says, come on, guys. Let me be a commissioned officer. He wants to be a commissioned officer. He wants to be a British officer. He wants his red coat. And I did a great thesis on in college on George Washington. You guys can read it anytime you want to. Okay, effects of the war. Okay, united them against the common enemy for the first time. They actually do become united thanks to William Pitt to a large degree. It created a great socializing experience for all the colonials that participated. The concept of being united as being brotherhood, as having a common destiny to some degree. Okay, but then also, like on flip, it created a lot of bitter feelings toward the British. And those bitter feelings, I mean, the British don't have a great love for the colonists because of what they observed when they were here, and I've already kind of pounded on that one too long. But by the same token, the British actually, I mean, the colonists actually have an increasingly bitter feeling toward the French. Excuse me, to the British. Okay, the French hawk, it's gone. It's out of there. It's no more. It's not a threat at all. And as we saw on that map, and the little colonial chicks. Okay, now they've gained a major sense of importance, and they should be able to play. They should have a voice. They should be able to have a say in government. Look at us. Look what we've done. Now the colonials take complete credit for having defeated the British. Excuse me, defeated the French, and the British, on the other hand, say the colonials could not have ever defeated the French. Wow, I'm really mixing this up. Without their help. Okay, and most likely the latter was probably very true. But it didn't stop the colonists from actually feeling it. Hey, we've arrived. We're important. We have a say. Okay. It does create major tensions, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. Your book really covers a good portion of this, and we have this a good chapter of this information in Zen, what we talked about, with some documents as well. It creates some major tensions between the Native Americans. Remember, they got played. They got played not only by the French, but they get played by the British as well. And one of the things that the British do kind of promise the Native Americans is, hey, when we win this battle and when we defeat the British, not if, but when we do, we're going to kick these people out and you can have your land back. Imagine what the Native Americans felt when it was the reverse. The British win, so they don't get the win, they don't get their land back, and then they don't have a great love for the British because of the fact of that intrinsic concept of taking land and ownership of land. So it creates a lot of rebellions. Pontiac Rebellion is a major one. That's why I got in blue. You should know it. The British kind of to counter these little rebellions and stuff, they constantly give gifts to the Native Americans, which are basically smallpox-infected blankets. They just wrap somebody up in some smallpox that's got smallpox. A couple people that got smallpox, and give it to the Indians. And once they sweat it in, it's lights out. Okay, so there's all kind of attacks that begin to take place during Pontiac's Rebellion in 1763. The British end up actually fighting another war. Well, at least the British do, along with the colonists. Because remember, the British troops are still here. There's a large force that are still here. And they end up with another battle instead of just the French. Now they're having the battle with these Native Americans because these Native Americans are really upset. They can see this as being extremely intrusive, and this is not going away. This is one of the major last stands, major offensives made by the Native Americans to try to oust these intrusive Europeans that are coming in. To solve this problem, Great Britain decides that they're going to implement what's known as the Proclamation of 1763. Guys, remember this because it shows up on test. Proclamation of 1763. Okay, basically it's a line and saying, hey, don't expand anything. Don't expand anything west of here. And that creates major problems because people, remember, running out of space, expansion, want to expand. That's what we fought this war for. And the concept of it being was the Paxton Boys. Okay, it's covered in your book. Make sure you read about the Paxton Boys. Basically, in the Irish, they're Scott Irish. The Scott Irish don't have a real love for the British either. So I mean, especially with the authority of the British, due to the issues of in Ireland and stuff, and Scotland as well. Basically, the phrases, they kept the Sabbath, they would keep the Sabbath and everything else they could get their stupid hands on. Okay, and that was a phrase that was constantly used. But this line of demarcation becomes a problem because of the fact that you're basically telling them, you just fought this war, you just kicked the French out, you kind of put down the Pontiac's rebellion, but now you're going to say, okay, here's a line, you can't move further west of this line. Stay on the east of this line. Because Great Britain didn't want to have to be constantly fighting these Indian wars. Okay, so rethinking the empire, the British government begins to prevent, attempts to prevent smuggling and try to control the colonists again. They established the rights of assistance, key word, key phrase, you guys should know it. A great case of James Otis. Now, James Otis is a kind of a really interesting person because of his life, of what happens to him. And I'm going to go over that really quick, just real briefly. But, he makes a case against this, and he makes the argument, the key of his argument, he's a great orator. He makes the argument that protection of a citizen's private property must be held higher regard than a preliminary statute. Oh, there's my bell. Okay, I'm going to try to finish this up really quick, guys. So Otis actually he loses this case. It doesn't fly with the British government, and basically it says parliamentary law, excuse me, and customs held equal weight. Okay, so Otis actually loses the case, but now at the time that he's doing this case, I mean the British citizens, I mean the British colonists love him. They think he's great. There's a picture of great James Otis. I always said it looks like somebody photoshopped his face onto somebody else's. It's just, he looks like a face has been pasted on there. Anyway, he kind of looks like a really happy-go-lucky guy type of guy. Well, ironically, though, in 1769, Otis actually ticks off a Boston custom house official, and he literally beats Otis in the top of the head with his cane. And I'm not talking about tap him on top of the head. He beats him. And when I say beat him, I mean beats him. And unfortunately, it has really bad effects on Otis because from the rest of his life, he suffers some mental instability. Wanders the streets of Boston. He rambles a lot. He's just not himself. And quickly, the people kind of turn on him. They start taunting him all the time. They totally forget about his contributions that he had made. And ironically, I said ironically twice just then, Otis actually is struck and killed by lightning in May of 1763. Kind of sad. Okay, guys, that wraps up the French and Indian War. Make sure you use this as a review, study. Make sure you read the material as well, that you know it, and key things that you should know. Be able to write that essay. Be able to answer those questions at the beginning of this essay. Okay, so we're going to be out of here, and I'm done. And I had fun doing this. Hope you had fun listening. Oh, maybe you didn't, but whatever.